And if there was ever a person that we could study about having joy, it was the Apostle Paul. The reason was because he lived in some tremendously difficult circumstances, and yet he found a way to have joy. Okay? If you go and you work out, and you see people who have been working out for years, or they're naturally athletic, or they're naturally great basketball players, they aren't necessarily the best at teaching you things because it comes to them naturally. But if you get that person who has lived a certain way, and all of a sudden you see this physical transformation in their life of, they used to weigh this much, but then they lost, 72 pounds, and they're winning powerlifting competitions and all that. You're like, wow, there's something different about them because they've been able to make this transformation, and they used to be like this. Or this person is 4'7", and yet they're dunking. How do they do that, right? I mean, there's this idea of if people are naturally inclined to be joyful or naturally inclined, they have everything going for them. They have the great relationships, they have the big house, they have all the the financial bank account, and everything like that. You're like, well, it's easy for them to have joy. But if you see somebody in prison, if you see somebody who is working hard for something and things not always going their way, and yet they still have joy, there's probably something to learn from them. And that's what we're seeing in the book of Philippians, how to have joy in the midst of the trials of our lives, because the Apostle Paul was writing this book while he was in prison. And he did not have that much money, and so his needs were not being met, and so actually the church in Philippi had to pull up an offering, and they didn't have a whole lot of money. And so part of this book is just saying, thank you for giving me the offering that you gave me. Because the Apostle Paul was pretty much down on his luck. And if that weren't enough, the Apostle Paul was also working with people, or working against people who were in ministry with him, but were also in competition against him. And that's a question I have for you today. Number one is this: have you ever felt that a win for someone else would be a loss for you? Let me say that again. Have you ever felt in your life, going through your life, that a win for somebody else is a loss for you? This is what I mean. I grew up playing soccer, and we were all one team, and we would do well. We would win tournaments, and we would do that sort of stuff. But I realized if I wasn't on my game and I wasn't doing well, then there was someone there to substitute for me. And then if they were doing well, the team would do well, but I would end up losing out by what? Sitting on the bench. And I didn't want to sit on the bench. And I remember going through my teams, whether it was my club team, whether it was my school team, whether, wherever I was playing, I remember having this sense of unity as a team, but also this sense of rivalry, wanting to play in the game. And it's this balance, and there were these times when I would have to sit out because somebody else was doing well. It's one thing if that's sports, or if it's maybe our job, or maybe, I've gotten injured or whatever, and so we need somebody to fill in. But it's different when it's the kingdom of God. You see, the kingdom of God, it should be different. It should be this idea of if I am down and out, then someone else comes to pick me up, or someone fills in, but then my slot is still there. But that's not always the case. That's what the Apostle Paul was dealing with in the book of Philippians, and sometimes that's what we deal with. As a pastor, unfortunately, sometimes that's what I deal with. There are times when let's take myself out of the picture, but I see two different pastors, and one is in competition with the other. Maybe it's for the size of their congregation. Maybe it's for the amount of time they get up to speak. Maybe it's you fill in the blank, and there seems to, unfortunately, be at times competition. Maybe it's not that, but maybe it's in the Christian school system. I remember going to a Christian school for a while, and I remember seeing parents get upset with other parents because their kid was doing this or not doing this, and there was this competition and rivalry where there should be unity. That's what Jesus prayed for right before he died. He prayed that the church would be one as he and God the Father were one. But we don't always see that. So the question that I have for you today is this: how do we control people's motives in ministry? Now, ministry, realize this: everybody has a ministry. As long as you are here on earth, you have ministry. It might be a prayer ministry. It might be hanging out with friends and neighbors and relatives. It might be giving to an organization like this church or outside of that, giving to missionaries. We all have ministry. But there are times when our selfish ambition gets in the way, or someone else's selfish ambition gets in the way. And so the question is this: how do we control people's motives in ministry? If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Acts chapter 1, starting in verse 15. Philippians. Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 15. And actually what I want to do, before we start in 15, I want to give you a little bit of background. And it starts in verse 12. So we're just going to quickly read through some verses, 12 through 14, just to give us a little bit of background of what's going on. And this is what the Apostle Paul is saying to the church in Philippi. He's saying this: "And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news." So one reason why the Apostle Paul is happy is because even in the midst of his imprisonment, he has this eternal perspective. Yes, I am suffering, but the good news, the gospel, the forefront of what we should be concerned about, the fact that people are coming to know Jesus and that they're growing in Jesus and having an effect for him in the community, that is continuing on, and it's actually increasing because I am in prison. And he says this is the reason why. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, that everything has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ." So everybody around him realizes that the Apostle Paul is there not because he was a burglar, not because he's a murderer, not because of any of that. He didn't assault anybody. The reason why he was there was because he was promoting a reconciliation with God through Jesus Christ. Everybody knew that. They could tell by his attitude. They could tell by the fact that he prayed for people. They could tell that he wasn't one of these people. Now, we're all sinners, right? But he wasn't one of these criminals. They could tell a difference in the Apostle Paul. And so the entire palace guard knows. And so what does that mean? That he is a witness for Jesus Christ even in the prisons. You see, wherever you go, you can be a witness for Jesus. Wherever you go, it doesn't matter where, whether you're up in front of people or whether you're just walking along the street, whether you're going to Walmart, whether you're in your community, whether you're talking to your HOA, you can always be a witness for Christ. And that's what the Apostle Paul is doing. It continues on, and it says in verse 13, "For everyone here, including the palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ, and because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear." Has there ever been a time in your household when Mama was sick? When Mama is sick. Mama does a lot of things in the house, right? But when Mama's sick, some people have to pick up the slack. Things need to get done, right? And I don't know how it is in your household, but in my household, when that happens, I don't want to put too many norms or anything, but we would have to find a way to eat, we would have to clean, we would have to do laundry, we have to do all those things, especially as a kid growing up, right? So when Mama was sick, other people would have to pick up the slack. But that also helping me to learn things that I needed to learn for life. And when the Apostle Paul was in prison, guess what happened? People had to pick up the slack. But this is what happened. People started growing in their gifts and their ability. They became bolder. They saw that the Apostle Paul was strong in his faith, and that gave them more strength and more courage to do what they needed to do, and that was to proclaim the gospel. But there's two types of people here. And that's what we're getting into verse 15. So the background is this. Paul's imprisonment has given others boldness to share the gospel. Somebody has to pick up the slack. And so people realize, wow, now that the Apostle Paul is in prison, we need to continue to start building churches. We need to share the gospel. We need to make sure that these churches that the Apostle Paul has established, that they're being overseen well. And so people are coming in and they're taking over leadership. And the Apostle Paul is like, this is great. I didn't expect this to happen from my imprisonment, but this is awesome. But we also see some difficulty here, and it's this. Number one, that people will do good things with bad motives. People will do good things with bad motives. This is what it says in verse 15. Verse 15, it says, it's true that some are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry, but others are preaching out of pure motives. So if we just look at verse 15, part A, the first statement in there, we realize that some people are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry. What is jealousy? Jealousy is basically saying, I hate you because of what you have. Okay? Now, hate is a strong word, but I think hate is sometimes the operative word here. All right? Maybe you could say, I don't like you because of what you have. And it might be accomplishment. It might be because of relationships. It might be because of your bank account. It might be because of literally the things that you have. In this day and age, people were upset with Paul because of the amount of influence he probably had. And there were probably people saying, well, look at Paul. I mean, I have just as much education as Paul. Or look at Paul, like, he's ugly. He wasn't known for being the most handsome man in the world, right? I mean, he's not good looking. I'm better looking than Paul. Right? Or Paul, he also wasn't really known for being a great orator, right? So, I mean, here's the Apostle Paul. He's getting up and speaking, and he's not a great speaker. You know, he gets up and he's talking, and some people fall asleep. That actually happened in the Book of Acts, right? And then they fell off a roof, but then he brings them back to life. I mean, that's pretty cool. But you realize that Paul wasn't the coolest guy in the world, and there were probably people who were saying, "Why does he have so much influence? That's not cool. I can do what Paul's doing. I can do it better, right? Anything you can do, I can do better." And so, I hate you, Paul. Maybe it's not hate. Yeah, of course I love Paul. Paul's part of the kingdom, right? But inside, you're kind of stirring. And there were people like that. And there are people like that today. And if I'm honest with myself, sometimes I'm one of those people. But this is what it says. Jealousy says, I hate you because of what you have. I want what you have, but you haven't. But then it continues on, and rivalry is this idea of, I want to succeed to prove that I'm better than you. When I played soccer, a lot of times it was rivalry. It was competition, right? Competition, I don't want to blanket it. But competition, I think, is a good thing. It helps us improve, and it certainly sells tickets, doesn't it? Right? NBA Finals. And so there's this healthy aspect of competition and everything. I mean, I work at a seminary, and there are people that are like, hey, how'd you do on this test? And there's this healthy competition. It makes people rise to the occasion. But there's also this idea of rivalry. I want to succeed to prove that I am better than you. And some people were doing this. When the Apostle Paul was in prison, some people were like, this is my time. This is my time to make sure that I get what I believe I deserve. But then there were other people too. There were other people, and we see this in the latter part of 15. It says, but others preached about Christ with pure motives. They preached because they love me for they know that I have been appointed to defend the good news. So we see this. Others do good things with good motives. So we have people doing good things in this situation. It's just that some people do it with wrong motives. Some people do it with right motives. The people with right motives do this. They have love and they have joy. Excuse me. They have love and they have joy as a motive for what they're doing. What they're saying is, I am happy for you because of what you have. The Apostle Paul, we're happy for what you're doing. And this is what we want to do when you are in prison. If you can't, we want to support you. And what is support? Support is this. If you can't succeed on your own, I want to help you accomplish the goal. That's what support is. So we have these two types of people. We have these people with jealousy and rivalry, and we have these people with love and support. And the big difference between each one is what team they're playing on. The people that are dealing with rivalry and with rivalry and with jealousy, they say, Paul, you and I are in different teams. The people that are dealing with love and support, with a motive of love and support, are saying, Paul, you and I are on the same team. We're accomplishing the same goal, that is the gospel, but there's two different motives. My question is, as we live throughout our life, do we live with jealousy and rivalry, or do we live with love and support? As followers of Jesus Christ, we are on the same team. And when we see someone succeed, we should be thanking God for that. Because they are succeeding and God is being glorified. God's name is being lifted up. And when we succeed, hopefully there are people around us who will love us and support us and say, man, that's awesome what you're doing, and seeing that Jesus is being glorified. And when we succeed, hopefully we aren't taking the credit, because we realize that it's ultimately God who's getting glorified in this situation. We should be. And so here's the Apostle Paul saying, I realize that in the midst of my imprisonment that the gospel is being shared, but there's two types of people. There are people that are doing it out of jealousy and rivalry, but there are also people here who are doing it out of their own goodwill, out of the love that they have in Christ, and support because they realize that we're on the same team. And then it continues on in verse 17, and it says this. It says, those others do not have pure motives as they preach about Christ. They preach with selfish ambition, not sincerely, intending to make my chains more painful to me. So now he goes back to the rivalry group, right? The people that says, the type of person that says, we're on different teams, we're on a different team from Paul. And this is what he says. He says, they preach Christ with impure motives, and they have selfish ambition. They want glory for themselves, and they want to hurt people along the way. Have you ever had those types of people in your life? Where you fall down, and they don't bother picking you up. All right? But that's one thing. They could just walk over you. But instead of just walking over you, they kick you along the way. Right? And that's what's probably happening with these people of the Apostle Paul. These people are probably speaking pretty negatively about Paul. It wasn't uncommon for his ministry. Okay? And at this point, let's pause here for a second. And let's just say, it might be appalling to some of us that this actually happens in the church. And I realize that. And I wish it didn't. But we also realize that as a body of believers, as followers of Jesus Christ, we should also understand that we're all sinners. And so we're trying toward a godly goal, but there are going to be times when we do it with imperfect motives. That when we have sin in our life, that some of us are going to get angry at times. And that some of us are going to get frustrated. It's not an excuse. Okay? It's not an excuse, but realize that we're all in process here. So hopefully, as we continue on in the church, there might have been times when you have done things to people in the church and it has hurt other people, this is what I want you to do. I want you to, if you need to reconcile, if you need to repent, do that. But I want you to find in yourself and in Christ to be able to forgive yourself of that. There are going to be times when people are going to hurt you in the church. Now, some people have felt immeasurable hurt from different people at different times, and I understand that. And that takes a process of healing, and I am sorry about that. But I also want you to understand that in the midst of that, don't stop being part of the church. You might have gotten hurt. Get healing. And hopefully we can be a place where that happens. Hopefully we can be a healthy place, a wholesome place for you to get healthy and to get healing. But I don't want that to stop you. Just because you've been hurt, I don't want that to stop you to having an impact for Jesus in the community we call the church. And so understand that the church is responsible for some of the bad things. The people are responsible for some of the bad things. But realize that it might happen, and get healthy and get back in the game. Now let's continue on. And it says this in verse 18. So we talk about selfish ambition. These people want glory for themselves, and they also want to kick Paul along the way. And so it continues on in verse 18. Remember our question? The question was this: how do we control people's motives in ministry? This is the answer. We don't. We give that over to God. Verse 18, this is what it says: but that doesn't matter. Their motives, their selfish ambitions don't matter at all. Why? It continues on. Whether their motives are false or genuine, the message about Jesus is being preached either way, so I rejoice. And I will continue to rejoice. For I know that as you pray for me and the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me, this will lead to my deliverance. This is what the Apostle Paul is saying. The Apostle Paul is saying is what matters. Motives don't matter. What matters is that the gospel is being preached, number one. And number two, be happy with the results no matter what the motive. Now let's pause here for a second. That is a difficult thing to do, isn't it? When I have friends on my soccer team who are on my team and they're winning and they're scoring goals and our victories means that I have to sit on the bench, that's frustrating for me. When I am in ministry, whatever that ministry might be, it might be being here preaching. It might be sharing. It might be your ministry might be to your grandkids, and you're being overlooked because the other grandparent gave them a car. So you fill in the blank, right? Everybody has rivalries in their life. Okay? It is difficult to do this, but the Apostle Paul had joy. And the reason why he had joy was because he was able to give the motives of everybody else up to Jesus and just say what's most important is that Jesus is being glorified. And when we can do all that we can, give the results up to Jesus, and just say as long as Jesus is being glorified, that's all that matters. Now that hurts. That means we have to eat crow sometimes. That means we have to eat humble pie when we don't deserve to eat humble pie. But if we're talking about joy here, if we're talking about being on the same team, then this is all that matters. Being happy with the results. That's what the Apostle Paul said. Continues on, or actually with the big idea. And it says the proclamation of the gospel, verse 19, the proclamation of the gospel will lead to Paul's release. The Apostle Paul also realized this. I don't care how the gospel is being shared, as long as it's being shared. And this is what's going to happen for me too. What's going to happen for me too is the more people that hear about the gospel, the more their hearts of compassion are going to be for me, and that's going to eventually lead to my release. So this is actually a good thing. Okay? And so now we get to the main point. The big idea is this. Don't try to measure or control people's motives. Don't do it. It's going to be a difficult thing. It's a chasing after the wind. There have been times in my life when I've been like, well, that person shouldn't be doing that because this is how they think, right? Those people who get under your skin. But the Apostle Paul is like, we can't measure that and we can't control that. All we can do is control our response. And if the gospel is being proclaimed, then that's all that matters. So he's saying, do not try to measure or control people's motives. Focus on the end goal. And the end goal is this. The gospel is being proclaimed. And then this. Let God figure out the rest. Don't you think God is a better judge of motives than we are? God is a better judge of motives than we are. See, it's kind of funny that we are reading a book from Philippians written by Paul and not another book written by someone who had bad motives back in the day. Right? I mean, there could have been, Jesus could have risen up that one of those people who had poor motives who was advancing the gospel, and they could have written a book of the Bible, but they didn't. See, in the end, we hear more and more about Paul than we do about any of those other people with false motives, even though they probably thought that they were pretty good at what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying influence and power is everything, right? Because God can raise up whoever he wants or whatever, but God has a funny way of knowing motives, also rewarding his children for faithfully obeying and believing. And so when we trust in God, when we trust in God about motives, when we trust in God and we say, God, I'm not going to worry about how people are doing things. I'm not going to worry about the rivalries. I'm not going to worry about any of that stuff. And I'm just going to worry about one thing, that the gospel is being proclaimed and that you are being glorified. And all the other stuff can go by the way. I don't care who gets credit, God. All I care about is the gospel and that you're being glorified. And if we can align ourselves with that and give over these petty things over to Jesus and let him figure out the motives, let him figure out who wins and loses, then we can be released to have joy in our life. Because the only alternative to joy is bitterness in this situation. God does not want us to have bitterness. And so when we look at our lives and we look at this, it's like that we do not measure or control a person's motives. We can't control or measure anybody else. So this is what we do. We focus on the end goal, the gospel being proclaimed. We just give everything over to God. So my question to you is this. Where do you get frustrated most with people's motives? Where do you get frustrated most? Sometimes it might be at work. Those people who are gaming for the promotion, right? And you're working hard, and you see these people going back and forth, and it's frustrating. Do your best to get the promotion. I'm not saying just sit back on the sidelines and not get in the game. When you're in the game, do the best you can, right? But at the end of the day, give it over to the Lord. Otherwise, those people are going to rob you of your joy. When you're in ministry, and when you find that it's frustrating, that people are getting along, or that people are saying difficult things about you, and they're wrong, it doesn't mean we don't continue to do ministry. We don't check out. We continue to do what we're doing, but we allow God to do what he's going to do with those people with false motives. When you're in your family, and there's rivalries in families, right? There's selfish ambition in families. And when you're dealing with those relationships, and it's causing difficulty. And you know the reason why your second cousin on your mother's side is doing what he's doing, right? And you're like, why? You know? And it's like just getting under our skin, and that's the reason why he's doing it. Do what you need to do to resolve conflict to the best that you can. Live to the best of your ability, live at peace with others. Give those motives over to God, because otherwise that person, that second cousin on your mother's side, they're going to steal your joy. I have one too. Right? Whatever it might be. We're talking about joy here. God has given us life. God has given us His Son. God has given us resources. God has given us relationships, and He wants us to enjoy them. And the way that we do that is not by measuring or controlling other people's motives, but by just showing Christ and sharing Christ to others, and allowing God to deal with those difficult situations. Being responsible, we're responsible for what we need to be responsible for, right? Whether it be work, whether it be conflicts at home, whether it be whatever it is, okay? But at the end of the day, give the results, give the motives over to God, and be released to have joy. The Apostle Paul could do it when he was in prison. If he can do it while he was in prison, then we can do it here in Gilbert, Arizona. Would you pray with me?